I want to go back to the arguments for and against the redistribution of income. But before we do that, just one word about the minimal state. Milton Friedman, the libertarian economist, he points out that many of the functions that we take for granted as properly belonging to government don't. They are paternalist. One example he gives is Social Security. He says it's a good idea for people to save for their retirement during their earning years, but it's wrong. It's a violation of people's liberty for the government to force everyone, whether they want to or not, to put aside some earnings today for the sake of their retirement. If people want to take the chance, or if people want to live big today and live a poor retirement, that should be their choice. They should be free to make those judgments and take those risks. So even Social Security would still be at odds with the minimal state that Milton Friedman argued for. It's sometimes thought that collective goods like police protection and fire protection will inevitably create the problem of free riders unless they're publicly provided. But there are ways to prevent free riders. There are ways to restrict even seemingly collective goods like fire protection. I read an article a while back about a private fire company, the Salem Fire Corporation in Arkansas. You can sign up with the Salem Fire Corporation, pay a yearly subscription fee, and if your house catches on fire, they will come and put out the fire. But they won't put out everybody's fire. They will only put it out if it's a fire in the home of a subscriber or if it starts to spread and to threaten the home of a subscriber. The newspaper article told the story of a homeowner who had subscribed to this company in the past but failed to renew his subscription. His house caught on fire. The Salem Fire Corporation showed up with its trucks and watched the house burn, just making sure that it didn't spread. The fire chief was asked, well, he wasn't exactly the fire chief, I guess he was the CEO. He was asked, how can you stand by with fire equipment and allow a person's home to burn? He replied, once we verified there was no danger to a member's property, we had no choice but to back off according to our rules. If we responded to all fires, he said, there would be no incentive to subscribe. The homeowner, in this case, tried to renew his subscription at the scene of the fire, but the head of the company refused. You can't wreck your car, he said, and then buy insurance for it later. So even public goods that we take for granted as being within the proper province of government can, many of them, in principle, be isolated, made exclusive to those who pay. That's all to do with the question of collective goods and the libertarians' injunction against paternalism. But let's go back now to the arguments about redistribution. Now, underlying the libertarians' case for the minimal state is a worry about coercion. But what's wrong with coercion? The libertarian offers this answer. To coerce someone, to use some person for the sake of the general welfare, is wrong because it calls into question the fundamental fact that we own ourselves, the fundamental moral fact of self-possession or self-ownership. The libertarians' argument against redistribution begins with this fundamental idea that we own ourselves. Nozick says that if the society as a whole can go to Bill Gates or go to Michael Jordan and tax away a portion of their wealth. What the society is really asserting is a collective property right in Bill Gates or in Michael Jordan. But that violates the fundamental principle that we belong to ourselves. Now, we've already heard a number of objections to the libertarian argument. What I would like to do today is to give the libertarians among us a chance to answer the objections that have been raised. And some have already identified themselves and have agreed to come and make the case for libertarianism to reply to the objections that have been raised. So raise your hand if you are among the libertarians who's prepared to stand up for the theory and respond to the objections. You are
Alex Harris.
Alex Harris, who's been a star on the weblog. All right, Alex, come here, stand up, come. We'll create a libertarian corner over here. And who else? Other libertarians who will join? What's your name? John? John Sheffield. John. Who else wants to join? Other brave libertarians who are prepared to take on, yes. What's your name? Julia Roto. Julia, come join us over there. Now, while Team Libertarian Julia, John, Alex, while Team Libertarian is gathering over there, let me just summarize the main objections that I've heard in class and on the website. Objection number one. And here, I'll come down to, I want to talk to Team Libertarian over here. So, objection number one is that the poor need the money more. That's an obvious objection. A lot more than do Bill Gates and Michael Jordan. Objection number two, it's not really slavery to tax, because at least in a democratic society, it's not a slaveholder, it's Congress. It's a democratic, you're smiling, Alex, already. You're confident you can reply to all of these? So, taxation by consent of the governed is not coerced. Third, some people have said, don't the successful, like Gates, owe a debt to society for their success that they repay by paying taxes? Who wants to respond to the first one? The poor need the money more. All right. And you're?
John.
John. All right, John. What's the answer? Here, I'll hold it.
All right. The poor need the money more. That's quite obvious. I could use the money. You know, I certainly wouldn't mind if Bill Gates gave me $1 million. I mean, I'd take 1,000. But at some point, you have to understand that the benefits of redistribution of wealth don't justify the initial violation of the property right. If you look at the argument, the poor need the money more, at no point in that argument do you contradict the fact that we've extrapolated from agreed upon principles that people own themselves. We've extrapolated that people have property rights. And so whether or not it would be a good thing or a nice thing, or even a necessary thing for the survival of some people, we don't see that that justifies the violation of the right that we've logically extrapolated.
Good. Okay.
And so that also, I mean, there still exists this institution of like individual philanthropy. Milton Friedman makes this argument.
All right, so Bill Gates
Chicago.
can give to charity if he wants to.
Right.
But it would still be wrong to coerce him.
Exactly.
To meet the needs of the poor.
Exactly.
Are the two of you happy with that reply? Anything to add? All right. Go ahead, Julie.
I think, Julia, yes.
Julia.
I think I could also add, okay, I guess I could add that there's a difference between needing something and deserving something. I mean, in an ideal society, everyone's needs will be met, but here we're arguing what do we deserve as a society. And, yeah.
And the poor don't deserve the benefits that would flow from taxing Michael Jordan to help them.
based on what we've come up with here, I don't think you deserve something like that.
All right, let me push you a little bit on that, Julia. The victims of Hurricane Katrina are in desperate need of help. Would you say that they don't deserve help that would come from the federal government through taxation?
Okay, that's a difficult question. I think this is a case where they need help, not deserve it. But I think, again, if you hit a certain level of requirements to reach sustenance, you're going to need help. Like if you don't have food or a place to live, that's a case of need.
So need is one thing, and desert is another.
Exactly.
All right. Who would like to reply? Yes.
Going back to the first point that he made about the property rights of the individual, the property rights are established and enforced by the government, which is a democratic government, and we have representatives who enforce those rights. If you live in a society that operates under those rules, then it should be up to the government to decide how those resources that come about through taxation are distributed, because it is through the consent of the government. And if you disagree with it, you don't have to live in that society where that operates.
All right, good. So, and tell me your name.
Raul?
Raul is pointing out, actually Raul is invoking point number 2. If the taxation is by the consent of the governed, it's not coerced, it's legitimate. Bill Gates and Michael Jordan are citizens of the United States. They get to vote for Congress. They get to vote their policy convictions, just like everybody else. Who would like to take that one on? John?
Basically, what the libertarians are objecting to in this case is the middle 80% deciding what the top 10% are doing for the bottom 10%.
Wait, John.
Not as exciting.
Majority, don't you believe in democracy?
Well, right, but at some point...
I mean, you say 80%, 10% majority. Majority rule is what? The majority.
Exactly, but...
In a democracy. Aren't you for democracy?
Yes, I'm for democracy, but... hang on. Democracy and mob rule aren't the same thing. Like
mob rule?
Mob rule. Exactly.
But in an open society, you have a recourse to address that through your representatives. And if the majority of the consent of those who are governed doesn't agree with you, then you're choosing to live in this society. And you have to operate under what the majority of society concludes.
All right, Alex, on democracy. Democracy, what about that?
The fact that I have won, 500,000th of a vote for one representative in Congress is not the same thing as my having the ability to decide for myself how to use my property rights. I'm a drop in the bucket. And,
You might lose the vote.
Exactly.
And they might take...
And I will. I mean, I don't have the decision right now of whether or not to pay taxes. If I don't, I get locked in jail. Or they tell me to get out of the country.
But Alex, let me make a small case for democracy and see what you would say. Why can't you, we live in a democratic society with freedom of speech, why can't you take to the hustings, persuade your fellow citizens that taxation is unjust, and try to get a majority?
I don't think that people should have to convince 280 million others simply in order to exercise their own rights, in order to not have their self-ownership violated. I think people should be able to do that without having to convince 280 million people.
Does that mean you're against democracy as a whole?
No, I just believe in a very limited form of democracy, whereby we have a constitution that severely limits the scope of what decisions can be made democratically.
All right, so you're saying that democracy is fine, except where fundamental rights are involved. And I think you could win, if you're going on the hustings, let me add one element to the argument you might make. Maybe you could say, put aside the economic debates, taxation. Suppose the individual right to religious liberty were at stake. Then, Alex, you could say on the hustings, surely you would all agree that we shouldn't put the right to individual liberty up to a vote.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why we have constitutional amendments and why we make it so hard to amend our Constitution.
So you would say that the right to private property, the right of Michael Jordan to keep all the money he makes, at least to protect it from redistribution, is the same kind of right with the same kind of weight as the right to freedom of speech, the right to religious liberty, rights that should trump what the majority wants.
Absolutely. The reason why we have a right to free speech is because we have a right to own ourselves, to exercise our voice in any way that we choose.
All right, good. All right, so all right, who would like to respond to that argument about democracy being, okay, up there, stand up.
I think comparing religion and economics, it's not the same thing. The reason why Bill Gates was able to make so much money is because we live in an economically and socially stable society. And if the government didn't provide for the poorest 10%, as you say, through taxation, then we would need more money for police to prevent crime. And so either way, like, there would be more taxes taken away to provide what you guys call like the necessary things that the government provides.
What's your name?
Anna?
Anna, let me ask you this. Why is the fundamental right to religious liberty different from the right Alex asserts as a fundamental right to private property and to keep what I earn? What's the difference between the two?
Because you wouldn't have, you wouldn't be able to make money, you wouldn't be able to own property if there wasn't a socially, like if society wasn't stable. And that's completely different from religion. That's like something personal, something that you can practice on your own in your own home. Whereas like me practicing my religion is not going to affect the next person. But if I'm poor and I'm desperate, like I might commit a crime to feed my family, and that can affect others.
Okay, good, thank you. Would it be wrong for someone to steal a loaf of bread to feed his starving family? Is that wrong?
I believe that it is.
Let's take a quick poll of the three of you. You say yes, it is wrong.
It
John?
violates property rights. It's wrong.
Even to save a starving family?
I mean, there are definitely other ways around that, and by justifying, no, hang on, before you laugh at me, that didn't work. Before justifying the act of stealing, you have to look at violating the right that we've already agreed exists, the right of self-possession and the possession of, I mean, your own things. We agree on property rights.
We agree it's stealing,
yeah,
so
we
property
agree
rights
stealing.
is not the issue.
All right, but
So why is it wrong to steal even to feed your starving family?
sort of the original argument that I made in the very first question you asked, the benefits of an action don't make the action just.
Do you want, what would you say, Julia? Is it all right to steal a loaf of bread to feed a starving family, or to steal a drug that your child needs to survive?
I think I'm okay with that, honestly. Even from a libertarian standpoint, I think that, okay, saying that you can just take money arbitrarily from people who have a lot to go to this pool of people who need it, but you have an individual who's acting on their own behalf to kind of save themselves. I mean, I think you said from the idea of like self-possession, they're also in charge of protecting themselves and keeping themselves alive. So therefore, even from a libertarian standpoint, that might be okay.
All right, that's good. That's good. All right, what about number 3 up here? Isn't it the case that the successful, the wealthy, owe a debt? They didn't do that all by themselves. They had to cooperate with other people. That they owe a debt to society, and that's expressed in taxation. You want to take that on, Julie?
Okay, this one, I believe that there is not a debt to society in the sense that how did these people become wealthy? They did something that society valued highly, something that society has already been providing for them. If anything, I think everything's canceled out. They provided a service to society, and society responded by somehow they got their wealth. So
So be concrete. In the case of Michael Jordan, I mean, to illustrate your point, there were people who helped him make the money, the teammates, the coach, people who taught him how to play. But you're saying, but they've all been paid for their services.
Exactly. And society derived a lot of benefit and pleasure from watching Michael Jordan play. I think that's how he paid his debt to society.
All right, good. Who would anyone like to take up that point? Yes.
I think that there's a problem here with that we're assuming that a person has self-possession when they live in a society. I feel like when you live in a society, you give up that right. I mean, technically, if I want to personally go out and kill someone because they offend me, that is self-possession. Because I live in a society, I cannot do that. I think it's kind of equivalent to say, because I have more money, I have resources that can save people's lives. Is it not okay for the government to take that from me? It's self-possession only to a certain extent because I'm living in a society where I have to take account of the people around me.
So are you questioning, what's your name?
Victoria.
Victoria, are you questioning the fundamental premise of self-possession?
Yes. I think that you don't really have self-possession if you choose to live in a society because you cannot just discount the people around you.
All right, I want to quickly get the response of the Libertarian team to the last point. The last point builds on, well, maybe it builds on Victoria's suggestion that we don't own ourselves, because it says that Bill Gates is wealthy, that Michael Jordan makes a huge income, isn't wholly their own doing. It's the product of a lot of luck. And so we can't claim that they morally deserve all the money they make. Who wants to reply to that? Alex?
You certainly could make the case that it is not, their wealth is not appropriate to the goodness in their hearts, but that's not really the morally relevant issue. The point is that they have received what they have through the free exchange of people who have given them their holdings, usually in exchange for providing some other service.
Good enough. I want to try to sum up what we've learned from this discussion, but first let's thank John, Alex, and Julia for an excellent, a really wonderful job. Toward the end of the discussion just now, Victoria challenged the premise of this line of reasoning, this libertarian logic. Maybe, she suggested, we don't own ourselves after all. If you reject the libertarian case against redistribution, there would seem to be an incentive to break into the libertarian line of reasoning at the earliest, at the most modest level, which is why a lot of people disputed that taxation is morally equivalent to forced labor. But what about the big claim, the premise, the big idea underlying the libertarian argument? Is it true that we own ourselves? Or can we do without that idea and still avoid what libertarians want to avoid, creating a society and an account of justice where some people can be just used for the sake of other people's welfare or even for the sake of the general good? Libertarians combat the utilitarian idea of using people as means for the collective happiness by saying the way to put a stop to that utilitarian logic of using persons is to resort to the intuitively powerful idea that we are the proprietors of our own person. That's Alex and Julia and John and Robert Nozick. What are the consequences for a theory of justice and an account of rights of calling into question the idea of self-possession? Does it mean that we're back to utilitarianism and using people and aggregating preferences and pushing the fat man off the bridge? Nozick doesn't himself fully develop the idea of self-possession. He borrows it from an earlier philosopher, John Locke. John Locke accounted for the rise of private property from the state of nature by a chain of reasoning very similar to the one that Nozick and the libertarians use. John Locke said, private property arises because when we mix our labor with things, unowned things, we come to acquire a property right in those things. And the reason is that we own our own labor. And the reason for that, we are the proprietors, the owners of our own person. And so in order to examine the moral force of the libertarian claim that we own ourselves, we need to turn to the English political philosopher John Locke and examine his account of private property and self-ownership. And that's what we'll do next time.